The right to vote is at the core of the American way of life. Since 1868, when the 14th Amendment was introduced setting slaves free, and in 1870 with the 15th Amendment ensuring these former slaves and their descendants the right to vote, African Americans have had to fight to keep that right. They have struggled with everything from poll taxes, literacy tests, intimidation, and even murder to try to stop them from voting. This documentary is about that struggle.
The Jim Crow guide, some of the rules, never lay claim to or overly demonstrate superior knowledge or intelligence.
People who had to own certain quantities and amounts of land and had to pay taxes to be able to vote.
The poll tax and literacy tests were used as instruments to keep people from voting.
They'd make the test so hard you had to read it. You had to have a master's degree from Harvard or Yale.
The most famous of the literacy tests were the parts that had things like how many stars are there in the universe, how many bubbles are in a bar of soap.
In some places, you had to interpret a section of the Alabama and Mississippi Constitution, or the Constitution of the United States. And that was a very subjective process, you know, going through it. And at some point they asked your race, and if you put down colored, it said it should be Negro. If you put down Negro, it should be colored.
There were just all kinds of hoops that you had to jump through if you did own land, if you could. I mean, how are you going to pass the test with questions on it, like how many bubbles in a bar of soap?
I'm telling you, for your own benefit, you had better turn around and get out of this area.
All we would like to do, sir, is to go to the
courthouse is closed. There's no business there.
We don't want to go in the courthouse. All we want to do is go to the lawn of the courthouse, kneel in prayer, and we'll gladly return.
You take your prayers back to your church. That's a proper place to pray. Sir, I'm sure that God will hear your prayer just as well down there as it will up here, but you're not going on this courthouse alone.
Well, sir, can we pray together, you and I?
You do your praying, I do mine, big boy. You don't pray for me. I don't want you to pray for me.
Well, will you pray for us?
Because I don't think your prayers get above your head.
Well, will you pray for us?
No, I'm not going to pray for you. I'll tend to my business, you tend to yours. Now, you better move these people out of here.
Sir,
we're trying to protect you.
You have to know how to love before you can.
Sir,
I don't have to love anybody I don't want to love. Sir, you do your own loving. You love your little niggas. I love who I please.
African Americans were intimidated, and they couldn't vote because they did not own any businesses. They worked for white people. You know what I mean? And if they voted, they were subject to lose their jobs.
When people wanted to register to vote, they put them off the land, wouldn't sell them food, and as a result of that, they had to erect tents to live.
There were killings, injuries, maimings, arrests, all kinds of things to discourage and even keep black people from voting.
They employed all kinds of tactics in terms to keep people into a relative constraint and condition so that they can maintain the power and the power structure.
After the Jim Crow laws, there was a drop in black political involvement, even in East Tennessee, because the Jim Crow laws prohibited it. And so you had to come back with this series of laws to reverse the Jim Crow laws.
It is not enough to pin the blame on others, to say this is a problem of one section of the country or another, or deplore the facts that we face. A great change is at hand, and our task, our obligation, is to make that revolution, that change, peaceful and constructive for all. Those who do nothing are inviting shame as well as violence. Those who act boldly are recognizing right as well as reality.
African Americans wanted the freedom to vote so badly that they were willing to do whatever it took, even if it meant bodily harm.
People were supposedly victims of hit and run, you know, then you have an African American male male with his been castrated and his penis stuck in his mouth, it can't be a victim of a hit-and-run accident.
Those are people who went down through there to register people, registered them to help them vote. There was an organization called the SNCC.
I remember the Mississippi summer of 1964, where people were really hurt as a result of that. And, you know, a number of people were killed in Mississippi and, in terms of trying to register people to vote.
The march to Birmingham and things like that was just to vote. That's all they wanted to do was vote.
John Lewis is the congressman from Atlanta. He's named for my grandfather. Had just very well chronicled just almost weekly confrontations with policemen all across the South. You know, I understand the joke on Fisk campus was, where did it get beat up today?
We're marching today to dramatize to the nation, dramatize to the world, that hundreds and thousands of Negro citizens of Alabama, but particularly here in the Black Belt area, denied the right to vote. And we intend to march to Montgomery to present certain grievances to Governor George C. Wallace.
Now, I remember the Evan Pettis Bridge so vividly because, again, I can't swim. And I was on that bridge and I had a choice of jumping off the bridge and couldn't swim, or, you know, just retreating and being hit. So I chose to retreat. But again, so many people were brutalized in terms of really making a difference.
You are to disperse, you are ordered to disperse, go home or go to your church. This march will not continue.
There's a place in Danville, Virginia, you know, where we set up voter registration drive, voter educational schools, you know, where they nationalized the National Guard. And one evening, with armored tank with a submachine gun, you know, pulled us off to the side of the road and told us to get out of the car and put our hands on top. And, you know, I had an older guy with me, and, you know, who I had high degree of respect for, and I was a little bit nervous, and I looked down at his shoe, and I saw some water coming down his shoe, and all at once, my water burst, you know, because it's an interesting thing in terms of fear, not knowing what's going to happen to you. These people got you in an alleyway, and they're very serious about change. I've seen, you know, police, you know, just beat people down like animals, like dogs, and then it comes to the realization what they've done, and tears come to their eyes. You know, they had beat a woman down who's pregnant, and then after they withdraw and just to look at to see the blood and the suffering, see the woman crawling on the ground and stuff, you know, and to kind of, I've done all of this.
Hey, can we get a doctor? Can we get a doctor? You want to arrest us? You don't have to beat us. No, you don't have to beat us.
There was someone who did not get credit, not only for votes, but for civil rights, you know, for civil rights and desegregation. He doesn't get credit, and that's Johnson, President Johnson.
I propose that we eliminate every remaining obstacle to the right and the opportunity to vote.
Martin Luther King went to Johnson. He says, here, he says, I want these civil rights laws passed. I want the right to vote and all of this. I want this, you know, help me do this, sign this in the law. And Johnson looked at him and says, now, what I want you to do, I want you to go, and I want you to make me do that. He was telling him, go out and demonstrate. Make me do it. You know what I mean? Make me do it. You go out and then I'll do it. But I'm not going to do it just between the two of us. You know what I mean? But you got to go out and make me do it. And that's what King did.
And had to pay taxes to be able to vote.
The poll tax and literacy tests were used as instruments to keep people from voting.
They'd make the test so hard you had to read it. You had to have a master's degree from Harvard or Yale.
The most famous of the literacy tests were the parts that had things like how many stars are there in the universe, how many bubbles are in a bar of soap.
In some places, you had to interpret a section of the Alabama or the Mississippi Constitution, or the Constitution of the United States. And that was a very subjective.
The Jim Crow guide, some of the rules, never lay claim to or overly demonstrate superior knowledge or intelligence.
People who had to own certain quantities and amounts of land.
Slaves and their descendants the right to vote. African Americans have had to fight to keep that right. They have struggled with everything from poll taxes, literacy tests, intimidation, and even murder to try to stop them from voting. This documentary is about that struggle. The right to vote is at the core of the American way of life. Since 1868, when the 14th Amendment was introduced setting slaves free, and in 1870 with the 15th Amendment ensuring these former